So I have received parts for that brush cutter that had a clutch fail in it. I had to be a little bit of a tailor because the harness for the brush cutter, the harness I use, uh, it has been bad for years, but now I figured I would do something before the foam padding falls out, so decided to do a little bit of sewing. Now let's look at assembling the brush cutter. I did cut open the old bearing that had failed in it. Prying it open, I could remove the inner part. I'm gonna use this as a driver, and it's good to cut a slot so it's easy to remove. And then it was just a matter of hammering the new bearing in place. First, just with the rod, and then that outer part to drive it all the way in, circling, pulling it in place. Had ordered a new clutch drum also. The old one was quite worn and had some damage after having the broken springs in there. Hammered that in place, did some measurements to ensure it was fully seated in the bearing before getting the circlip that holds it in place. It's a little tricky being so deep in the hole. I had to grind away some material on the circlip plier to even remove it, but it was possible to get it on there. And rather than undo the flywheel, the part that's on the crank, I simply took the clutch apart and refitted the new pieces onto the old flywheel. It had some spring washers here that kind of went out of place. It took a little filling, making sure they were in the correct position before tightening things up. But these are nice, easy machines. I did replace the guide, plastic guide inside. I think the old one could be reused, but this wasn't very expensive. It had kind of melted at one end. Probably the bearing had gotten plenty hot. Hammered that in. I missed where I drove it in a little deeper with a deep socket and added kind of two metal parts to each end of the tube. A little bit of grease and inserted the drive shaft. The clutch assembly, after getting the throttle cable into position, could be bolted onto the engine. Then the tube could be slid in there, and it had some markings in some previous wrenching, so it could be installed in the same position as it was before. And then the handle part, it has some rubber mounts for vibration. It was a little bit tricky in getting the far end to get where it was, because it's a clamp holding everything in place, and that wanted to not stay where it was supposed to, but eventually got it. Then the gearbox at the bottom of it could be put into place, and I kind of just aligned that with the wear marks and tightened things up. And then the handle, but here it's a little bit of a nut that sits in a slot that was out of place, so it wouldn't tighten up. I actually had that nut on the loose, so I didn't know really where it was coming from, but figured it out at least. But with that in the correct position, its handlebar could be tightened back up. Getting all the covers back on, I had to remove the air filter cover to get the top part in place. And that could be tightened up, and then the rear part and bottom part with the pull starter attached to it could be bolted back in place. So quite simple. And with all the bolts in there, it was time to fill up with a little bit of fuel and test start it. We'll see if this was smart to repair it or just buy a new one. It's always a gamble repairing an old machine, because parts, I did go with original parts, and quickly gets a little bit on the expensive side. and now it stops and stays there. I've also received some of the plants I will be planting this summer. It's about a little over 3,000 this time. I will probably need to plant a couple of thousand more before winter, but I'm starting with this. It's easier to get more manageable amounts, and I'm do the same as before. I mainly spruce because it's most suited for that, but I mix in a couple of pines here and there for a little bit of diversity. So it's about 10% pine, the rest is spruce. And we're up to speed with the video footage here. It was actually recorded today. The brush cutter was assembled a couple of days ago, but haven't found time to do the videos. I also found a little time to look at some small oil leaks on the harvester, so a video about that will come in the future at some point. Next few days will be only planting trees at least. So it's going good so far, almost according to plan. So perfect. Stay safe, take care.